What if Spider-Man had the powers of all his villains? This question lingers in the shadows of his existence, one that could drastically alter not only his life but the entire fate of New York City. Spider-Man has long been defined by his code of ethics, his commitment to fighting for justice, and his refusal to kill. But what would happen if Peter Parker, the lovable web-slinger, was given the powers of his greatest adversaries? The answer is not one we want to hear. For in a world where Peter Parker wields the terrifying abilities of villains like Venom, Green Goblin, Sandman, Vulture, Rhino, and others, the line between hero and villain blurs to the point of non-existence. Each villain represents a piece of Peter's potential darkness, something deep within him that he fights to keep suppressed. Their powers are not just a threat to him, they are a reflection of his own fears, desires, and weaknesses, and in the wrong hands they could unleash chaos upon the world. Let's begin with the first and most significant source of dark power, the Venom symbiote. When Peter first encountered the symbiote, it granted him enhanced strength, speed, and agility, taking his abilities to terrifying heights. But the symbiote also awakened something darker within him, amplifying his rage and desire for vengeance. For a brief moment, Peter was consumed by this power, his morality slipping away as he embraced the dark side of his persona. But what if Peter no longer had the restraint to remove the symbiote, and instead allowed it to merge with him permanently? With the Venom symbiote fully bonded to him, Peter would possess strength far beyond his normal limits. He would be faster, stronger, and more resilient than ever before, able to heal rapidly from almost any injury. His senses would be heightened, allowing him to sense danger before it even happens. Yet, the symbiote would also feed on his negative emotions, amplifying them to an uncontrollable level. The line between Spider-Man and Venom would become nearly indistinguishable, and Peter's actions would be driven not by justice, but by whatever emotions surged through him at any given moment. Anger, vengeance, and fear would consume him, and he would become a walking nightmare for anyone who opposed him. The next villain, whose powers would reshape Peter's destiny, is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. The Vulture's greatest asset isn't his cunning intellect or his ruthless nature, but his ability to fly. Imagine Peter, who already has the agility and strength of Spider-Man, now granted the ability to soar through the skies with the Vulture's flight suit. With this power, Peter would no longer be confined to the rooftops of New York City. He could strike from above, swooping down on unsuspecting criminals or heroes alike. He would be able to chase down anyone attempting to escape, no matter how fast they ran. From the skies, Peter would be able to survey the entire city, using the vantage point to outsmart his enemies. But with flight comes an inherent danger, the temptation to become a predator, hunting those below as if they were nothing more than prey. The sense of superiority that comes with commanding the air could begin to erode Peter's sense of humility, a crucial trait that has kept him grounded as a hero. The more he relies on the power of flight, the more he may begin to see the world not as a place to protect, but as one to control. But raw strength and flight are not the only powers Peter could inherit. The ability to shape-shift, as embodied by Sandman, would be an equally dangerous addition to his arsenal. Flint Marko, the Sandman, can transform his body into sand, allowing him to slip through cracks, reshape his form, and absorb blows that would have crippled anyone else. If Peter possessed this power, he could mold his body to any shape he desired, making him virtually invulnerable. He could slip through walls, disappear into the ground, or even grow to enormous proportions, overwhelming enemies with his sheer mass. Sandman's powers are all about adaptation, and Peter's ability to transform his form would give him an edge over any opponent. But it would also make him increasingly detached from his humanity. If Peter could reshape himself at will, what would happen to his sense of self? Would he lose the very essence of who he is, becoming more of a force of nature than a man? Would he still be able to relate to the people he's sworn to protect, or would he become something unrecognizable, a being of limitless potential with no anchor to the world he once knew? And then there's the mind of Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's greatest foes. Osborn's greatest weapon is his intellect, his ability to manipulate and control those around him. He doesn't rely on brute strength or power. He uses his mind to outthink his opponents, turning them into pawns in his twisted game. If Peter were to inherit the Green Goblin's mental acuity, he would become an even greater force to be reckoned with. He would be able to manipulate people, twisting their will and making them do his bidding. The mental powers he would gain would go beyond mere mind control. Peter would have the ability to outmaneuver anyone in a battle of wits. His foes would become pawns, the city itself his chessboard. The true horror, however, would come when Peter starts using his intellect not just to defeat his enemies, but to bend them to his will. He could manipulate his fellow heroes, forcing them to act against their interests. Friends would become foes, and no one would be safe from his reach. The very fabric of Spider-Man's morality would unravel as he begins to see others not as allies, but as tools to further his own agenda. Of course, no discussion of Spider-Man's villainous powers would be complete without mentioning the raw, unrelenting strength of the Rhino. Alexei Sitsevich, the Rhino, is a powerhouse, a living tank capable of charging through walls and overwhelming anyone in his path. If Peter inherited this power, his physical strength would become nearly unmatched. He would be able to crush anything in his way with ease, shattering buildings and obliterating enemies with a single blow. His already impressive strength would be augmented to a terrifying degree, making him a one-man wrecking crew. However, strength alone is rarely enough to make someone truly invincible. Peter would need to balance his newfound power with his other abilities, lest he become consumed by it. The temptation to use brute force to solve every problem could push him to the brink of losing his sense of justice. He would need to ask himself, when is enough enough? When does strength become tyranny? Taken together, the powers of all Spider-Man's villains would create a being of unimaginable power, one who could bend the world to his will. But would Peter be able to maintain his humanity in the face of such overwhelming force? Each power represents a different aspect of his psyche: anger, fear, pride, intellect, and brute strength. And with them comes the potential for corruption. The more Peter embraces these powers, the further he drifts from the person he once was. The question is no longer whether he can defeat his enemies. The question is whether he can defeat himself. In the end, what would happen if Spider-Man had the powers of all his villains? The answer lies not in the power he would gain, but in the choices he would make with it. Could he hold on to the values that make him Spider-Man, or would he become the very thing he's fought against? The darkness that lies within every villain might be waiting for him, ready to pull him under. And when that moment comes, who would be left to stop him? As Peter's powers grow exponentially, the stakes rise higher and higher. The next question becomes, what happens when Spider-Man starts to understand that with great power comes even greater consequences? His enemies are not mere criminals. They are reflections of the flaws and weaknesses within Peter himself. If Peter allowed these powers to fully take root, he would find himself standing at the precipice of moral destruction. His struggle wouldn't be against his enemies but against his own inner darkness. Each villain's power he possesses represents a different part of him. The rage and impulsiveness of Venom, the superiority and arrogance of Green Goblin, the manipulation and deception of Sandman, the raw strength and primal instincts of Rhino, and the cold intellect of Vulture. All of these traits, which once served as the foundation for Peter's heroic identity, would begin to tear apart the very core of who he is. With the manipulation powers of the Green Goblin and Sandman's shape-shifting ability, Peter could control anyone. The citizens of New York, the other heroes, even his closest allies, could become pawns in his game. Spider-Man's ability to inspire hope would falter, and in its place, a terrifying new figure would emerge. One who could use his mind to control, twist, and dominate every single person he came into contact with. Imagine Spider-Man having the power to manipulate the thoughts and emotions of his enemies. He could convince anyone that their worst fears were true, make them believe they were fighting for the wrong cause, or even erase their will altogether. Would Peter, in his unyielding need to protect the city, begin to justify his actions? Would he rationalize that bending the minds of others was necessary for the greater good? He could create an army of loyal followers, turning New York into his personal empire, where dissent is crushed before it even begins. Yet, Peter would not remain untouched by this transformation. His mind, which once focused on protecting others and upholding justice, would be twisted by the power he holds. The darkness would seep into every crevice of his consciousness. When Peter begins to use his powers in such a manipulative way, his sense of self would erode. The guilt of controlling others, the realization that he was no longer a hero but a tyrant, would weigh heavily on him. He would become less like the Spider-Man we know and more like the very villains he fought against. His once clear sense of morality would blur beyond recognition. Would he still be able to tell right from wrong? Or would he come to believe that his power made him the only one who could define what was just? The real horror lies not just in Peter's actions, but in his potential descent into madness. The more he used these powers, the more unstable his mind would become. The Green Goblin's influence is known to corrupt anyone who comes into contact with it, twisting their desires and darkening their thoughts. If Peter allowed himself to fall fully under its sway, the consequences could be catastrophic. His emotions would spiral out of control, especially with the added influence of the Venom symbiote. Anger, rage, and despair would cloud his judgment. The power to control minds would make him believe that he was above everyone else, that he knew better than any other person. With his newfound flight abilities from Vulture, his godlike strength from Rhino, and his ability to manipulate matter with Sandman's powers, Peter would be unstoppable in a physical sense. But the mind, once fractured, would become a prison of its own. He would no longer be able to separate himself from the darkness within. At this point, Peter's transformation would be nearly complete. No longer the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, he would become a monstrous figure, feared by all, including those who once called him a hero. His reputation would no longer inspire hope. Instead, it would send a shiver down the spine of anyone who encountered him. The people of New York, once his friends, would now cower under his oppressive reign. His fellow heroes, the Avengers, would be forced to make a difficult decision: stop Peter before he becomes a true tyrant, or risk losing the one person who has been a symbol of hope for so long. And yet, as much as Peter would try to justify his actions, believing that he was doing what was necessary for the good of the world, he would face a devastating internal conflict. The powers he gained from his enemies would not just warp his body, but his soul. His very essence would be corrupted by their influence. and Peter would have to ask himself if he could ever truly return to the man he once was. Could he fight against the urge to become a power-hungry ruler? Would he ever be able to escape the clutches of the very darkness that has always been part of him? And even if he could, what would be left of the person he was? The journey back to redemption would be far more complicated than simply removing the Venom symbiote or abandoning the Green Goblin's tactics. The longer Peter remains consumed by the powers of his enemies, the more his humanity would slip away. As Peter stands at the edge of becoming something far worse than the villains he once fought, the question remains, can Spider-Man ever truly be a hero again if he possesses the power of all his foes? Each new ability comes with a price: his mind, his heart, and his very soul. In the end, the true mystery lies not in the powers themselves, but in how Peter Parker, the boy who once wanted nothing more than to help others, would handle the temptation of absolute power. Would he conquer it? Or would he become the very thing he has fought against for so long? With the consequences of these powers fully realized, Peter's fall would be inevitable, and the path to redemption would seem almost impossible. If Spider-Man had the powers of all his villains, it would not be a question of what he could do, but whether he could keep his identity intact at all. Would his strength overpower his conscience? Would his flight allow him to escape his own guilt, or would he fall into the same darkness that corrupted those who came before him? The battle for New York would no longer be just a fight against criminals. It would be a battle for Peter's very soul. As Peter's powers continue to evolve, we move into an even darker territory where the very essence of his being is put to the test. The transformation is not just physical anymore. It's psychological. With each new power he adopts, Peter finds himself confronted not only by his own desires for control, but by the terrifying realization that he is no longer the hero New York once adored. The more his enemy's powers infiltrate his psyche, the further he drifts from the values that once defined him. One of the most disturbing shifts in this transformation occurs when Peter begins to harness the power of Dr. Octopus. Otto Octavius, despite his twisted nature, is a brilliant strategist with a mind that could rival the greatest thinkers in the world. His mechanical appendages grant him unparalleled dexterity, allowing him to manipulate his surroundings with ease. With these arms, Peter would become far more than just a skilled fighter. He would become a true master of his environment. These tentacles could manipulate objects with incredible precision, allowing Peter to disarm opponents, manipulate buildings, and even escape traps that would otherwise be impossible for a regular human to navigate. But as Peter taps into this power, something shifts in his mind. Dr. Octopus was never just a brute. He was a master tactician, always thinking several steps ahead of his enemies. What happens when Peter begins to think like Otto, when his mind begins to reflect the same cold, calculating nature? The compassionate hero we once knew would become a far more ruthless individual, always planning, always controlling, always thinking of the best way to secure his dominance over both heroes and villains alike. As Peter takes on the powers of more villains, the line between his identity as Peter Parker and his darker persona as Spider-Man begins to blur. The psychological strain becomes unbearable. The more powers he wields, the more fractured his sense of self becomes. The Sandman's shape-shifting ability and the Rhino's brute strength are powerful tools in battle, but they come at a price: Peter's growing disconnection from the humanity that made him Spider-Man. As he taps into his darker instincts, he finds it harder to relate to the world around him. His emotions, once his greatest strength, begin to unravel. He starts to view people not as individuals, but as obstacles to be overcome, as tools to be used or discarded when necessary. The city he once swore to protect becomes nothing more than a chessboard in his eyes. and he the king, making every move with precision and dominance. The powers of the Green Goblin and Vulture provide him with not only physical superiority, but mental fortitude, the power to manipulate the very minds of those around him. As Spider-Man gains the ability to control thoughts, emotions, and even the behavior of others, he begins to see the world differently. The sense of responsibility that once weighed heavily on him begins to fade. Why would he save someone who doesn't appreciate the sacrifices he makes? Why would he protect a city that doesn't understand the burden of his power? Slowly, Peter's sense of justice begins to erode, replaced by a twisted vision of control and order. His fear of becoming a villain is replaced by the belief that he is the only one capable of ensuring peace, no matter the cost. Yet, the power Peter now wields does not come without consequences. The more he taps into the powers of his villains, the more unstable his mind becomes. The symbiote amplifies his rage and desire for revenge, while the Green Goblin's psyche threatens to unravel his sense of morality entirely. Every time Peter uses these powers, he feels the pull of the darkness inside him, urging him to go further, to embrace the potential for destruction and domination that lies just beneath the surface. The question becomes not whether Peter can maintain control, but whether he even wants to. The temptation to use his newfound abilities to shape the world in his image, to eliminate anyone who stands in his way, becomes irresistible. Peter begins to view his previous relationships with others through a lens of superiority. The trust he once placed in people like Mary Jane, Aunt May, and even his fellow heroes becomes distorted. They are no longer allies in his mind. They are pawns in his greater plan. His bond with Mary Jane, once his grounding force, is now an afterthought. She, like everyone else, becomes an obstacle in his quest for ultimate control. And as his mental state deteriorates, so too does his physical form. The power of Venom, combined with the shape-shifting abilities of Sandman, starts to take its toll. Peter begins to morph not only physically but emotionally, becoming something entirely unrecognizable. The man who was once the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is now a dark, malevolent force, capable of unimaginable destruction. But what is the true cost of Peter's transformation? It is not just the loss of his humanity, but the loss of everything he once held dear. His connections with others, the relationships he fought so hard to protect, begin to disintegrate. His friends and loved ones, recognizing the change in him, start to fear him. Even the other heroes of New York, such as Daredevil, the Avengers, and even Captain America, would begin to see Peter not as a hero, but as a threat. They would be forced to confront the possibility that the Spider-Man they knew, the man who saved their lives and fought for justice, has been replaced by something far darker, something beyond redemption. In his isolation, Peter would become a tyrant, lording over New York with the powers of his villains and his twisted sense of justice. The city would fall under his control, but it would not be the vibrant, hopeful place it once was. It would become a city of fear, ruled by a man who believes that peace can only be achieved through dominance. The more Peter uses his powers, the more entrenched in darkness he becomes. The line between hero and villain is no longer visible. Spider-Man, with the powers of his greatest enemies, has become a force of evil in a world that once revered him. But even as Peter embraces this new tyrannical version of himself, a part of him still clings to the idea of redemption. Deep down, he knows that he is losing himself. He knows that every step he takes towards absolute power is a step away from the man he once was. But it's too late. He has gone too far. The darkness is now in control, and there is no turning back. Spider-Man, with the powers of all his villains, has become the very thing he once fought against. His fall from grace is complete, and the world he once sought to protect is now under his oppressive rule. As Peter's transformation into the ultimate villain progresses, it becomes clear that the power he wields has a profound impact on the world around him. His enemies, once mere obstacles in his path, now appear insignificant compared to the force he has become. The powers of Venom, Sandman, Rhino, Green Goblin, Vulture, and Dr. Octopus merge within him, creating a being who surpasses anything New York has ever witnessed. But in this world where Peter Parker has embraced the very essence of his foes, there are still remnants of the man he used to be, the hero, the protector. The question that lingers is not whether he can be stopped, but whether he even wants to be. At the heart of this transformation lies Peter's internal struggle. Despite the overwhelming influence of the powers he now controls, a part of him still clings to the ideals he once upheld. The Spider-Man he was, the one who made jokes while battling criminals, who fought to save even the most hopeless of souls, has become a distant memory. The city he once swore to protect is now at his mercy. As the days go by, the man who was Peter Parker begins to fade away, and a new force arises, Spider-Man, the tyrant. His sense of empathy erodes, replaced by a cold, calculating drive for dominance. His need to protect is no longer fueled by love for the people of New York, but by the belief that only he has the power to shape the future. The more he uses his villainous powers, the more he becomes a reflection of the very individuals who once sought to destroy him. The city, once a vibrant symbol of hope, becomes his kingdom. The people who once relied on Spider-Man's heroism now live in fear, as their savior has turned into their oppressor. He watches from the rooftops, not as a protector, but as a ruler. His enhanced intellect, granted by the Green Goblin, allows him to see all the cracks in society, all the ways he could manipulate the people to serve his vision. The Sandman's shape-shifting ability gives him an unprecedented advantage in battle, making him nearly impossible to defeat. And with the combined powers of Venom and Rhino, he is not just a force of nature, he is a destructive machine, unstoppable and unyielding. At first, Peter tries to maintain control over his actions, telling himself that he is only doing what is necessary for the greater good. He convinces himself that his control over the city is not tyranny but a means of ensuring safety and order. But the more he uses these powers, the more he becomes consumed by them. What started as a desire to protect New York becomes a hunger for absolute control. The power to manipulate minds, to shape the very fabric of reality around him begins to overwhelm him. The mental abilities of Dr. Octopus and the manipulation skills of Green Goblin allow Peter to bend others to his will. Friends become enemies, and enemies become mere puppets. He can make anyone do what he wants, control their actions with a single thought. The moral lines he once carefully walked have dissolved, and he becomes increasingly ruthless in his actions. The people of New York, once his greatest source of strength, are now tools for his twisted vision of order. As Peter's descent into villainy deepens, the impact on his personal relationships becomes undeniable. Mary Jane, Aunt May, and the few remaining people he once cared about begin to see the change in him. Mary Jane, the woman who once understood him like no one else, is horrified by the man he has become. She tries to reach him, to remind him of the person he once was, but her words fall on deaf ears. Peter, now fully consumed by the powers of his enemies, no longer recognizes the man he once was. His heart, once full of love and compassion, is now hollowed out by the darkness within. The guilt he once carried, The weight of every life lost because of his failures has been replaced by a sense of superiority. He believes that he alone has the right to decide who lives and who dies, who deserves protection and who does not. Mary Jane's pleas are ignored, and she is ultimately forced to leave him, unable to bear the sight of the man who once promised to always protect her, now the very force that could destroy everything they once held dear. But it's not just Mary Jane who suffers. The Avengers, once his allies in the fight against evil, now find themselves in a deadly confrontation with Spider-Man. They can no longer trust him. Iron Man, Captain America, and the rest of the team realize that the Spider-Man they once called friend has become something entirely different, something far more dangerous. They attempt to reason with him, to remind him of his roots, but Peter has already gone too far. His intellect, powered by the Green Goblin's mind, allows him to outmaneuver them at every turn. His speed, enhanced by the Venom symbiote, makes him a formidable opponent, and his raw strength, courtesy of Rhino, is enough to incapacitate even the strongest of heroes. The Avengers, who once stood united with him, are now forced to treat him as an enemy. The battle that ensues is brutal, a fight for the very soul of Spider-Man. But it's clear, Peter has already lost that battle. As the days stretch on, Peter's descent into darkness continues. His powers, once used to protect, have become instruments of control. The city that once cheered for Spider-Man now trembles in fear as he stands at the helm of a new order. There are no heroes left to stop him. His friends are either too scared to challenge him or have turned against him, unable to bear the weight of his transformation. Peter has become the very thing he once fought against. The villain he was destined to defeat has become his own reflection, and the city he swore to protect is now his kingdom to rule. In the end, Peter's fate is sealed by the very powers that once gave him strength. The powers of his villains, Venom, Green Goblin, Sandman, Rhino, Vulture, and Dr. Octopus, have consumed him, leaving nothing of the boy who once dreamed of being a hero. His mind is shattered, his heart hollow, and the city that once loved him is now a mere shadow of what it once was. Spider-Man, with the powers of all his villains, has become a force too great to stop and too powerful to redeem. And so, the question lingers: what happens when a hero becomes the very thing he was meant to destroy? The answer is simple. Spider-Man, the man who once carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, has become the weight of the world itself. As Peter Parker embraces the complete manifestation of his villain's powers, his descent into darkness reaches its final phase. The city, once a beacon of hope for Spider-Man's unyielding resolve, is now a grim, controlled environment, subjected to his overwhelming strength. But even as the walls close in around him, Peter's internal struggle rages on. The power of the symbiote, the strategic mind of the Green Goblin, the raw strength of Rhino, the shape-shifting abilities of Sandman, the mastery of manipulation from Dr. Octopus, and the intelligence of Vulture have all merged into one unstoppable force, each element amplifying the others. The Spider-Man that once swung from the rooftops with a sense of hope and joy has been swallowed by a twisted vision of order, a vision where he alone holds the reins to fate. Despite his dominance, a faint, flickering part of Peter's former self remains locked away, struggling to break free from the suffocating grip of the villainous powers that control him. Yet, this part of him, though still alive, is powerless against the onslaught of emotions and impulses unleashed by the combination of his enemy's traits. The very powers that once made him an exceptional hero now work against him, leaving him a hollow shell of the person he once was. The more he uses these powers, the more detached he becomes from the people he once swore to protect, and the more dangerous he becomes to everyone around him. It is in these final moments that Peter's internal conflict reaches its peak. Though his powers allow him to control the world around him, his inability to control himself marks his ultimate downfall. With each manipulation, each action fueled by anger, vengeance, or power, Peter alienates those he loves, furthering his descent into madness. Mary Jane, Aunt May, and his remaining friends, those few who still believed in him, are the first to recognize the severity of his transformation. They see the changes in him before he does, the darkness that has clouded his once clear intentions. Mary Jane, heartbroken by the man Peter has become, attempts to reach out to him, to remind him of who he was, but Peter has crossed a threshold beyond which even she can no longer save him. Their love, once a symbol of hope, has been obliterated in the face of Peter's unrelenting lust for power. The Avengers, once his comrades in the battle for justice, are forced into an agonizing decision: either confront Peter and try to stop him, or allow him to continue his reign over New York and risk losing everything. But even the combined might of Earth's mightiest heroes is no match for the monstrous power Peter now possesses. The Venom symbiote amplifies his rage, and his enhanced intellect, granted by the Green Goblin, makes him a strategic genius capable of countering every move the Avengers make. Every fight, every battle they attempt, ends in a crushing defeat, with Peter easily dismantling their efforts one by one. He no longer sees them as friends or allies, but as pawns on a chessboard, dispensable when they no longer serve his greater purpose. As Spider-Man's reign over New York continues, the city becomes an unrecognizable wasteland, drained of its former vibrancy. The people who once cheered for Spider-Man now live in constant fear. Under Peter's control, every corner of the city is under surveillance, every movement scrutinized. Crime, once a rampant issue in New York, is no longer a concern, but in its place, a greater tyranny has emerged, one that seeks to crush any resistance underfoot. Peter's vision of peace is no longer about justice, it's about domination. Anyone who dares challenge his authority is swiftly eliminated, their efforts rendered meaningless in the face of his near-infinite powers. What began as an innocent desire to protect the people of New York has morphed into a thirst for control. And the more Peter exerts his power, the more isolated he becomes. There is no one left to challenge him, no one left to call him to accountability. His friends, his family, and even the very citizens he once protected have become nothing more than tools to enforce his will. Spider-Man's morality, once shaped by his strong sense of responsibility, has crumbled, replaced by an insatiable need to maintain order. But in this relentless pursuit of control, Peter's mind begins to fracture further, until he is no longer the person he once was. The familiar voice of the man who once stood as the hero of New York is gone, drowned out by the cacophony of villainous influences inside him. And as the power of the villains begins to take full control, Peter's original identity fades entirely, leaving behind a shell of a man who believes he is the world's savior, when in truth, he is its greatest threat. The heroes who once revered Spider-Man now view him with fear, for they know that the man they once trusted is beyond redemption. The idea that Spider-Man, the hero, could become the villain was once unthinkable. But now, with all his enemies' powers coursing through him, the truth is undeniable. Peter Parker has become a force of darkness that the world may never be able to undo. The final moments of Peter's transformation are not filled with celebration or victory, but with a growing sense of despair. He stands alone atop the tallest building in New York, looking down at the city he once protected. The streets are silent, devoid of the energy and life that once characterized them. The people cower below, afraid of the very hero they once trusted. The Avengers, the few remaining heroes, and even the innocent civilians have become nothing more than pawns in his game, a game he believes he alone controls. Peter's desire to protect, which once made him Spider-Man, has been completely consumed by a new twisted obsession control. The more power he wields, the more he loses touch with the values that once made him the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. At the end of it all, Peter is left to face the cruel irony of his existence. He has all the power in the world, more than any hero or villain could ever hope for, but it has come at the cost of his humanity. The more he manipulates, controls, and destroys, the further he drifts from the man he used to be. And in the end, when Peter looks in the mirror, he no longer sees the face of a hero. He sees a reflection of the villains he once fought. Spider-Man has become the thing he swore to destroy, and the city he once swore to protect is now his to rule with an iron fist. As Peter stands at the apex of his power, overlooking the fractured city that once reverberated with his laughter and his heroic deeds, something in him shifts, albeit faintly, as if a buried ember still flickers beneath the avalanche of villainous influence. He has crushed every opposition, manipulated every ally, and ruled New York with an iron fist, yet an unsettling emptiness gnaws at the edges of his mind. It's the familiar feeling of doubt, the echo of his former self, the Peter Parker who would always ask, "With great power comes great responsibility." That voice, now nearly silent, whispers in the recesses of his mind, but it's being drowned out by the tumult of his darker impulses, the ego, the hunger for control, and the need to dominate. In the deepest recesses of his consciousness, Peter recognizes the truth. He has become a monster, not unlike the ones he fought for so many years. The Green Goblin's lust for power, the Venom symbiote's insatiable hunger, Sandman's need to reshape his existence to avoid destruction, Dr. Octopus's mindless calculations, and Rhino's blind rage have all melded into something grotesque within him. But what's worse, what Peter hasn't fully realized yet, is that he has completely forsaken his humanity. His sense of right and wrong has become an afterthought, lost in the vast chasm of absolute power. He stands atop the world, yet he feels no peace. He is the ruler of everything, yet he has no one left to trust, no one left to love. This is the moment of truth. Can Spider-Man still be saved, or is he beyond redemption? The heroes he once called friends, now his enemies, have tried everything they could to reach him, to remind him of the man he used to be. But every attempt has failed. They see only the tyrant, the villain in the guise of a hero, and the people of New York, who once saw him as their protector, now view him with dread. They no longer believe in the Spider-Man they once knew. The symbol of hope has been shattered, replaced by the oppressive rule of a man who once fought for freedom. What's left of the man who was Peter Parker? There's a moment when Peter finally steps back from the chaos, from the reign of terror he has unleashed. The weight of the world presses upon him, and the arrogance that had fueled his every decision begins to crumble. He begins to realize something that he had long pushed aside, that even with all his power, even with all his control, he has lost everything that ever mattered to him. His family, his friends, his love, these are the things that once gave him purpose, and now they are gone. The consequences of his choices, the lives lost, the trust betrayed, seep into his conscience, and for the first time in a long while, Peter questions whether any of it was worth it. It is in this moment of clarity, as the world he's built around himself begins to crumble, that Peter faces the greatest challenge of his life: redemption. But can someone so far gone truly be redeemed? The task ahead of him is not simply about saving the city or restoring his place among the heroes of the world. It is about saving himself from the darkness that has consumed him. The power that once made him Spider-Man now threatens to destroy him completely. The longer he remains in control, the more he loses the very essence of who he is. The more he controls others, the more he loses himself. But redemption is not an easy path. The very powers that have consumed Peter are still within him, bubbling beneath the surface, ready to take over once more. Every villainous trait, every dark instinct is a temptation pulling him away from the light. Even if he wanted to change, would he be able to? The forces of Venom, Sandman, and the Green Goblin are ingrained in his being now. They are part of him, just as much as the original Peter Parker. The battle for his soul is not one he can win easily, if at all. In a final, tragic twist, Peter realizes that redemption may not be something he can achieve on his own. The friends he has alienated, the allies he has betrayed, will not be able to simply forgive him. The people of New York, once so enamored with their hero, now despise him. His return to grace, if it's even possible, will require sacrifice, sacrifices that Peter might not be ready to make. The very powers he used to dominate the world now threaten to obliterate the very city he once fought to protect. The realization hits him hard. He stands alone, looking at the empty streets below. He is not a hero, nor a villain. He is a ghost, trapped between two worlds, neither of which will accept him. The ultimate irony is that Peter Parker, the boy who was given the chance to protect others, has now become the one thing he vowed to never be: a tyrant, a destroyer, someone who rules not out of justice, but out of an overwhelming sense of superiority. His powers have consumed him, twisted his heart, and turned him into a mere shadow of the man he once was. But in that shadow, the faintest glimmer of hope remains, a whisper, a sliver of the person Peter once was. It is here, in the deepest darkness, that Peter faces his final test. Can he cast aside the very powers that made him this monster? Can he shed the influence of his greatest foes and rediscover the man he once was, or will he remain trapped in the web he's created for himself? In the end, it may not be about saving the city or redeeming his name. It may be about saving himself, if such a thing is even possible. Spider-Man's journey, once one of hope and heroism, now stands as a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the cost of losing oneself in the pursuit of control. As Peter stands at the crossroads of his fate, the weight of his actions begins to fully settle on his shoulders. There is no hero's return awaiting him, only the bitter, harsh reality of the choices he's made. The city beneath him, now twisted by his own hand, offers no comfort. His victory, which he once believed would bring peace, is hollow and empty. Peter's mind, once sharp and focused, now feels like an overgrown battlefield, each power he's absorbed from his enemies fighting for dominance. The symbiote's hunger still gnaws at him, urging him toward chaos. The Green Goblin's calculating nature whispers in his ear, convincing him that only his vision of control can save the world. The raw, uncontrollable power of Rhino roars inside him, feeding his desire for destruction. Even the manipulative genius of Dr. Octopus twists his thoughts, pushing him to act out of logic rather than emotion. Each influence is a constant oppressive weight on his shoulders, making it impossible to simply be Peter Parker again. But deep within the fractured remnants of Peter's conscience, there's a moment, a fleeting instant, where he sees the world as it truly is. His moral compass, while faint and fragile, still flickers. In this moment of clarity, he is struck by the horrifying realization he has not brought order. Instead, he has enslaved it under his rule. The streets that once thrived with life and hope are now silent, their vibrancy crushed beneath the weight of his tyranny. The people once cheering for their Spider-Man now whisper in fear of the monster that once stood among them as a protector. His friends, those few who once stood beside him in battle, are now distant memories, unreachable and irretrievable. Mary Jane, Aunt May, and even the other heroes of New York have all turned their backs on him. They don't see Spider-Man anymore. They see the reflection of their worst fears, embodied in the very person they once trusted. In this painful moment of reckoning, Peter knows that what he has become is irreversible, not just to the world, but to himself. The man he once was, the boy who fought for justice, who loved deeply, and who carried the weight of responsibility, seems like a distant memory. The memories of swinging through the city, saving lives, and laughing with friends are buried beneath the monstrous persona he has become. Even his powers, which once served as tools for good, now feel like chains, binding him to the monstrous image he has forged. But even as the realization settles in, Peter's heart still holds on to one last glimmer of hope, the possibility of redemption. It is the only thing keeping him tethered to the person he used to be. Could there be a way out of this darkness? Could he relinquish the powers that have twisted him beyond recognition? Could he find a way to undo the damage he has caused? Or is it too late? The thought of redemption feels almost impossible now. He has destroyed so much, betrayed so many, and turned against everything he once stood for. Yet that small spark within him refuses to be extinguished. Peter knows that the path forward won't be easy. He's alienated every ally he ever had, and the people who once trusted him are now too afraid to even look at him. But as the weight of his choices begins to sink in, Peter realizes that the only way to reclaim his soul is through sacrifice. The powers he wields are too great to control without destroying himself completely. He must give them up. He must face the fact that he cannot continue living in this twisted form, with the influence of his enemies constantly battling for dominance within him. This is where Peter's redemption begins, not in a moment of grandiose heroism, but in a quiet, painful realization that his journey has come full circle. In this moment, Peter acknowledges the truth. No amount of power, no amount of control can fill the emptiness he feels inside. The people of New York may never forgive him, but he must find the courage to forgive himself. Only then can he begin the slow and painful process of reclaiming the man he used to be. But this is no easy task. The venom symbiote, once a part of him, still calls out for him, its dark influence whispering in his ear. The strength of Rhino still courses through his veins, urging him to destroy anyone who stands in his way. The mind of Dr. Octopus, the scheming intellect of the Green Goblin, and the raw power of Sandman are still embedded in his psyche, constantly testing his resolve. The fight for Peter's soul is not one he can win overnight. It will be a battle, a long drawn-out struggle for redemption and for reclaiming his humanity. As the days pass, Peter takes the first tentative steps towards undoing the damage he has caused. He seeks out those he has hurt, those who might still have a shred of faith in him. He doesn't expect forgiveness, But he knows that healing begins with acknowledgement, with accepting responsibility for his actions. He reaches out to Mary Jane, to Aunt May, and to the remaining heroes in New York, apologizing for his mistakes and for the pain he has caused. It is not easy. The wounds he has inflicted are deep, and the scars they've left behind will take time to heal. But even if the world doesn't accept him, Peter knows that he must try, for without redemption, without a path back to his former self, there is nothing left of the person he once was. In time, Peter begins to relinquish the powers he has borrowed from his enemies. The symbiote is the hardest to part with, its dark allure still calling out to him, but he knows that embracing it once more would mean losing everything. He sheds the suit, casting it away into the deepest part of his mind, where its influence can no longer reach him. The raw power of Rhino fades, and with it, the desire to dominate. The intellect of the Green Goblin, while still sharp, is tempered by the realization that true strength lies not in control, but in compassion. The manipulative tendencies of Dr. Octopus are subdued by Peter's growing awareness that power used to control others is never a path to peace. And so, Peter Parker begins the long road back to redemption, not by reclaiming the city he once saved, but by reclaiming himself. He knows that this journey will be fraught with obstacles. He may never be the hero he once was, and he may never fully regain the trust of those he has hurt. But for the first time in a long while, Peter feels a flicker of hope. It is not the hope of a hero returning to save the day. It is the hope of a man who has lost everything, only to discover that the most difficult battle of all is the one fought within. In the end, Peter's redemption is not about undoing the past. It's about moving forward, about finding a new purpose in the ashes of his former self. And as he looks out over the city, now free from his tyrannical grip, he realizes that while the road to redemption may be long, it is still a road worth walking. As Peter Parker begins the difficult journey back to some semblance of humanity, the weight of his choices continues to bear down on him. Even though he's shed the powers that once consumed him, the scars of his actions remain. The city of New York may be free from his iron rule, but it is no longer the vibrant, bustling place it once was. The destruction Peter wrought has left deep marks on the landscape and on the hearts of its people. The question now is whether Peter can ever find peace within himself, even as the world around him remains wary of the person he has become. The first step in Peter's recovery is to rebuild his relationships, but the damage he's done runs deep. Mary Jane, Aunt May, and the rest of his friends and family are all but strangers now. How could they ever trust him again, after everything he did? He knows that the path to forgiveness won't be easy, and it may not even be possible. Yet, it is a journey he must take, not to win back their approval, but to restore his own sense of self-worth. Without redemption, without the possibility of reconciling his past actions, Peter would be lost forever. He begins by reaching out to Mary Jane, the one person who knew him better than anyone else. Their history together is filled with love and pain, and Peter's betrayal of that love has left a wound that may never heal. Mary Jane, though deeply hurt and scarred by what he has become, listens. She doesn't offer forgiveness immediately, and Peter doesn't expect it. What he seeks is not absolution, but understanding. He wants her to know that the man she loved, the man who swore to protect her, still exists deep inside him. It is a small, fragile hope, but it is a start. Aunt May, too, is devastated by Peter's actions. The woman who raised him, who always believed in him, now has to come to terms with the fact that her nephew, the boy she loved like her own son, became the very monster she feared. Peter visits her, but their reunion is strained. She looks at him with a mixture of sadness, fear, and anger. She doesn't know if she can ever trust him again. Yet she agrees to listen. She doesn't offer forgiveness, but she doesn't push him away either. It is a glimmer of hope, but only that. Aunt May represents the heart of Peter's struggle. She embodies the past he has to reconcile with and the emotional toll of his actions. But it's not just his relationships with his loved ones that Peter needs to rebuild. It's his connection to the city, to the people who once saw him as their protector. After all, Spider-Man was never just a hero to New York. He was a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the belief that good could triumph over evil. Peter now has to figure out how to reclaim that symbol, even when he knows he's the one who destroyed it. He begins by doing small, quiet acts of service for the people who need it most, helping with repairs in the city, assisting in rescue efforts, and showing the people of New York that he is no longer the tyrant who ruled over them. It's a slow and difficult process, but through these actions, Peter hopes to remind the city of the good he once stood for, if not as Spider-Man, then as Peter Parker. However, Peter's internal struggle is far from over. Despite his best efforts to shed the powers of his enemies, their influence still lingers within him. The power of the Venom symbiote, although now gone, has left a mark on Peter's psyche. The dark, controlling urges that once defined him as a villain are still a part of him. When Peter is faced with moments of anger or frustration, he feels the pull of those darker instincts, the desire to lash out, to impose his will on others. It is an ongoing battle to fight those urges, to remind himself that he is no longer the man who sought to control everything around him. But every day, Peter struggles to hold on to the values that once defined him. Every day, he is reminded of what happens when he lets those darker powers take control. This ongoing battle within him is mirrored in the wider world. The other heroes of New York, though no longer his enemies, are still wary of him. They don't know whether Peter can be trusted again. The Avengers, once his allies, are cautious in their interactions with him, unsure whether they should welcome him back into their fold. Peter knows that no matter how much he tries to make amends, he will always be haunted by what he has done. The city may forgive him, but his soul may never fully recover from the damage he has inflicted. And yet, Peter continues to push forward, slowly carving out a place for himself in a world that no longer understands him. He fights not just for redemption, but for the chance to start over. His journey is no longer about being Spider-Man, the hero who saves the day, but about being Peter Parker again, the person who can face the consequences of his actions, who can look at himself in the mirror without the weight of his mistakes drowning him. The road to redemption is long, and Peter knows that he will never truly be free of the darkness that has consumed him. But perhaps, just perhaps, he can find a new purpose in the ashes of his past, a purpose rooted not in power, but in humility and understanding. The people of New York begin to see the changes in him, though they are hesitant to believe it. Slowly, over time, Peter earns back some of their trust, but he knows that it will never be the same. The city, once his, is now just another reminder of what he lost. Yet, as he walks the streets once more, he finds solace in the simple acts of kindness he offers to those in need. It's not enough to erase the past, but it's enough to remind him that redemption is possible, even if it is not perfect. Peter Parker, the man who once believed in absolute power and control, has learned the hardest lesson of all, that true strength lies in vulnerability, in the ability to face one's mistakes, and in the courage to change. It is not a perfect redemption, and it may never be, but it is a path forward. a path that leads Peter back to who he was meant to be, not a hero without flaws, but a man who is willing to confront them, no matter the cost. In the end, Peter understands that redemption is not about undoing the past. It's about learning from it, growing from it, and finding the strength to rebuild what was broken. And while he may never fully heal, he now knows that as long as he keeps trying, there is always hope. Peter's journey toward redemption continues to evolve, though the shadows of his past are never far behind. His attempts to reconcile with his former self, to reconnect with the people he once loved and the city he swore to protect, come with both small victories and devastating setbacks. He no longer has the luxury of time, the freedom to experiment with his identity or his powers as he once did. Every action now feels weighed down by the knowledge of what he's capable of, and the responsibility of what he's done is a constant presence in his mind. The city, however, begins to sense a shift. Though slow and unsteady, change starts to appear in the form of quiet moments, when Peter helps an elderly woman cross the street, or when he quietly fixes a broken window without anyone noticing. It's not the grand gestures of Spider-Man swinging through the air, but rather the small, unnoticed acts of service that begin to stitch his reputation back together, piece by piece. People in New York, once too afraid to even whisper his name, begin to notice the change. His power no longer commands fear, but a tentative curiosity. The Spider-Man they once feared may not be completely gone, but the man beneath the mask is struggling to regain his humanity. The lingering effects of his time as a villain weigh heavily on Peter, and it becomes increasingly clear that he can't outrun his past. It follows him like a shadow, haunting his every step, reminding him of the atrocities he's committed. There are moments when the darkness calls to him once again, when the rage and control he once wielded threaten to take over. During these moments, Peter fights with every fiber of his being to resist, but the temptation is always there, deep within, whispering that one more decision, one more choice, could allow him to rule once again. Despite this, he holds on to the belief that change is possible. He doesn't expect forgiveness from everyone, nor does he want it. What he seeks is the ability to look at himself without feeling the weight of every wrong he's ever committed. The process is painstakingly slow, but Peter begins to rebuild his relationships. His relationship with Aunt May, for instance, remains tenuous but hopeful. They speak less about the past and more about the future. She listens cautiously, but not without compassion. And in her quiet moments of support, Peter finds the strength to continue. Their interactions may never return to the way they were, but Peter no longer expects them to. Instead, he accepts that healing, for both of them, will take time, and that time is something he now understands the true value of. Mary Jane, too, becomes a focal point of Peter's path forward, though still scarred by his actions. Her heart, which once beat in rhythm with his, remains open to the possibility of healing. She is reluctant to fully accept him back into her life, but Peter understands why. He does not push, nor does he demand answers. He gives her space, understanding that the damage he has done is not something that can be fixed overnight. Her forgiveness, if it ever comes, will not be a gift. It will be earned through time and persistence. And so, Peter works quietly, focusing on becoming the man who can look her in the eye without shame. The broader hero community remains wary, uncertain of where they stand with Peter. They see him working to rebuild his life, but they can't shake the fear of what he was capable of during his reign as a tyrant. There are still those who see him as an enemy, as a potential threat. Some, like Captain America, argue that Spider-Man should be allowed the chance to prove his redemption, while others, like Iron Man, remain cautious, unsure of whether Peter can ever truly be trusted again. But Peter understands their doubts. He doesn't seek to prove himself to them. He seeks to prove himself to himself. In the weeks that follow, Peter's acts of redemption become more visible. He doesn't wear the mask of Spider-Man as much, choosing instead to step back into the role of Peter Parker. He works with local organizations, helping in small ways, whether it's tutoring students, cleaning up damaged neighborhoods, or lending a hand at local shelters. He's no longer the hero of the hour, but he no longer needs to be. These small acts are the foundation of his recovery, the tangible proof that he is not defined by his past mistakes. There are those who question whether Peter will ever truly be able to redeem himself, but that's a question only he can answer. He can't erase the damage he's done, and he can't undo the pain he's caused. But what he can do is show, day by day, that he is not the man he was. Redemption isn't about returning to who he once was. It's about accepting the person he's become, flaws and all, and using the lessons he's learned to shape a better future. The biggest test of all comes when Peter is once again faced with a choice that tests his resolve. An old enemy, someone from his past, returns to threaten the city. This time, Peter is different. He stands at a crossroads, fully aware of the power he could use to defeat this threat. The temptation to revert to his old ways, to seize control and put an end to the conflict on his terms, is overwhelming. But Peter chooses a different path. He doesn't fight with brute force or manipulation. He uses his mind, his compassion, and his desire to protect rather than dominate. This is not the Peter who sought to control the city. This is a Peter who seeks to protect it, not through force but through understanding. When the battle ends, it is clear Peter Parker has not just redeemed himself in the eyes of the city. He has redeemed himself in his own eyes. His victory isn't one of triumph, but of growth. He's no longer the man who used power to rule. He's the man who understands the weight of that power and the responsibility that comes with it. His redemption is not a return to heroism as he once knew it, but a new beginning, a new understanding of what it means to be a hero, not by the powers he wields, but by the choices he makes. Though the road to full redemption may never be completed, Peter now knows that it's the journey itself that matters most. Every step he takes, no matter how small, brings him closer to the person he is meant to be. He may never fully erase the scars of his past, but he has learned the most important lesson of all, that true heroism lies in the courage to face one's flaws and the strength to change. Peter's path of redemption continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Though he has made significant strides in regaining control of his life and reconnecting with the people he once loved, the weight of his past continues to haunt him. Despite the small victories and the rebuilding of his relationships, Peter knows that true peace will never come easily. Redemption is not a single moment, but a series of choices, each one harder than the last, each one requiring Peter to confront the parts of himself that he once feared and tried to bury. The city, ever vigilant and constantly changing, provides new challenges for Peter as he works to rebuild trust with the people of New York. A new crisis emerges, one that tests not just his strength, but his ability to truly lead as a hero. A new wave of villains, emerging from the shadows of the criminal underworld, seeks to take advantage of the uncertainty Peter has left behind. These are not the familiar foes of his past, but a new breed, one that thrives in the cracks and gaps left by Spider-Man's absence. This new threat arrives subtly at first, with small crimes escalating into larger, more organized efforts to destabilize the city. As Peter watches the chaos unfold from the sidelines, he knows that he can't stay out of the fight forever. Though his own past still weighs on him, he cannot ignore the responsibility he feels for the city. This isn't about reclaiming his title as Spider-Man or seeking glory. It's about proving to himself and to the world that he can still be the protector he once was, even if he is forever changed. What happens next is the culmination of Peter's growth. He makes the choice to return to his old role, not as a masked figure cloaked in secrecy, but as Peter Parker, the man who has learned the value of humility, of responsibility, and of second chances. His actions speak louder than any costume or symbol. Peter works with local law enforcement, coordinating efforts to bring down the growing criminal enterprise piece by piece. He relies on his intellect, his understanding of human nature, and the lessons he's learned from his own past to guide his decisions. Through these efforts, Peter slowly begins to repair his relationship with the heroes he once fought beside. There are still those who remain suspicious of him, unsure if he can truly be trusted again. But gradually, they see the man he's become, the one who is not only willing to fight for what is right, but who is also willing to be vulnerable, to admit his flaws, and to grow from them. This new Peter Parker, though not perfect, is a man of integrity, a man who has learned that heroism is not about power or glory, but about making the right choices, no matter how difficult. As the criminal syndicate is dismantled, Peter finally understands that the battles he fights now are not the ones that define him. It is not about defeating villains or proving his worth as a hero. It's about restoring the trust of the people he has hurt. It's about standing side by side with those who once doubted him and showing them that he is worthy of their faith. The battle for redemption is not a single dramatic clash. It is a lifetime of choices, some small and others grand, each one building on the last. Peter's redemption arc culminates not in an epic battle, but in a quiet moment of introspection. He stands alone on the rooftop, looking out over the city that once saw him as a monster and now sees him as something else. Perhaps not a hero in the traditional sense, but someone who has earned his place in their hearts again. The weight of his past will never fully leave him, but Peter knows that he no longer has to carry it alone. He has learned the importance of community, of asking for help, and of accepting forgiveness, even when it doesn't come easily. As time passes, Peter continues to rebuild his life, working with the people of New York to heal the wounds of the past. The city may never fully forget what happened, but Peter now understands that redemption is not about erasing the past. It's about learning from it, growing from it, and making the world a better place with each new day. Though the scars of his villainous days remain, Peter has found a new sense of purpose. He is no longer the man who wielded power for control. He is the man who fights for what's right, not because he has to, but because he believes in it. And with every new step he takes, Peter Parker, once a broken man, becomes a symbol of hope, not just to the city, but to himself. Redemption may never be fully realized, but Peter knows that the journey, with all its difficulties and setbacks, is what ultimately defines him. Peter's journey toward redemption, while marked by deep introspection and small victories, is never truly complete. The scars of his past still remain, etched into his soul, reminding him of the darkness he once embraced. But as he continues to rebuild his life, a new, unexpected challenge emerges, one that tests not only his physical abilities, but also his resolve to stay on the path of redemption. A new villain, one far more insidious than any Peter has encountered before, begins to rise in the shadows of the city. This villain, unlike those from Peter's past, is not driven by simple greed or vengeance. Instead, They thrive on manipulation, playing on the insecurities and fears of those around them. This adversary is not a brute force or a mastermind bent on destruction. This enemy is subtle, working from the shadows, undermining the very fabric of New York society. They prey on the weaknesses of the people Peter once swore to protect, turning them against one another and inciting chaos. At first, Peter tries to distance himself from the fight. He's no longer the hero of New York, and he believes that his time has passed. But as the city begins to unravel under this new threat, Peter realizes that he cannot sit idly by. This is not about him proving himself or seeking redemption through grand gestures. It's about something deeper, about protecting the people he once loved, not as a symbol or as a superhero, but as a man who is deeply committed to righting the wrongs of his past. This villain's tactics force Peter to confront a truth he has long avoided, the idea that true redemption does not come without sacrifice. He cannot fight this battle alone. The temptation to revert to his old ways, to use the immense power he once wielded, is strong. But Peter knows that using those dark abilities would mean falling back into the very cycle of control and dominance he's worked so hard to escape. Instead, he relies on his strength, his resilience, and the lessons he's learned over the years. As he takes up the mantle once more, not as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker, the man who has learned the cost of power, he begins to rebuild the relationships he has broken. The Avengers, still wary but increasingly willing to give him a chance, come together to fight this new threat. This time, however, Peter does not lead with brute force. He leads with empathy, understanding, and strategic thinking. He knows that he cannot save everyone, and he cannot undo the past, but he can fight to protect those who still believe in him and the values he has fought to regain. As the battle unfolds, Peter realizes that the true enemy is not just the villain they face, but the remnants of his own darkness, his fear of failure, his fear of rejection, and his fear of what he's become. These are the battles he must fight within himself. The villain may be powerful, but Peter's internal struggle is even more daunting. It is in this moment that Peter finally understands redemption is not a destination, but a continuous process. It is not about erasing the past, but about accepting it and choosing every day to be better than before. In the final confrontation, Peter faces the villain not as a masked hero, but as the man he has become, the one who has been broken and rebuilt, who has faced the darkness within and chosen to fight it. The battle is not won with punches or webs, but with the realization that true power lies in choosing to protect, to understand, and to forgive. This final victory, while hard-won, is not a return to the hero Peter once was, but a new beginning, one that sees him embrace his humanity, flaws and all. As the city begins to heal, Peter walks away from the fight not as a symbol of unyielding strength, but as a man who has learned that true strength comes from vulnerability, from the willingness to face the consequences of one's actions, and from the courage to keep fighting for what's right, no matter the cost. Peter Parker's redemption arc is not one of perfection or flawless victory. It is a journey marked by pain, loss, and struggle. But in the end, it is a journey that defines him not as a hero who always wins, but as a man who understands the value of second chances and the importance of never giving up, even when the road ahead seems impossible. Peter's redemption does not come from his powers, but from his ability to choose to be better every single day. And though the road ahead is long, and the past will always remain a part of him, Peter walks it with a new purpose, a purpose not driven by the need for recognition or redemption, but by the simple desire to protect and to learn from his mistakes, no matter how hard it may be. Peter's life, though now stabilized, remains forever changed. The realization that redemption is a lifelong journey continues to shape his every action. As he walks the streets of New York, no longer the Spider-Man who swings through the city with bravado, but a quiet figure working in the shadows, his role has shifted. The city no longer expects him to save the day, nor does it demand perfection from him. Instead, Peter's redemption is found in the everyday acts of kindness, in the small moments of service that once seemed insignificant. In the quiet, understated ways he begins to reclaim trust, he finds purpose again. The path is difficult. No matter how many times Peter proves himself, the shadows of his past continue to cast long, lingering doubts in his mind. The people who once adored him may never fully trust him again. The damage he has caused, particularly to those closest to him, is not something that can be undone with a simple apology. The deep scars that marred his relationships with Mary Jane, Aunt May, and the other heroes of New York will always be there. They are the result of actions that can't be erased, only lived with. But Peter has accepted this. He knows that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's not about erasing every wrong he's ever done or winning back the affection of every person he's hurt. It's about the ability to face those mistakes head-on, to acknowledge the pain he's caused, and to fight every day to be better than he was before. In many ways, this is his greatest strength. The willingness to accept responsibility and to act from a place of humility and understanding. As Peter continues to rebuild, he finds solace in helping others, not as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker. He starts by offering his skills to local charities and volunteering his time at shelters, helping those who have suffered because of the same kind of power imbalance he once embodied. In doing so, he begins to make tangible amends, though the impact of his work will never be enough to undo the past. He doesn't seek gratitude or applause. He seeks growth. His connection with Mary Jane remains strained but hopeful. There are no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations of love. Instead, Peter simply listens. He listens to her fears, her doubts, her hopes. He's learned that sometimes the most powerful thing he can do is show up, be present, and let the healing process unfold, even if it takes years. Mary Jane, though still scarred by their past, starts to see a different man, one who is not trying to prove himself, but who is simply trying to be the best version of himself he can be, even if that version is imperfect. Aunt May, too, begins to soften. But her trust is not easily regained. Peter knows that she may never fully forgive him for what he became, but the bond they share is still there. It may not be the same as before, but it is something he cherishes deeply. He doesn't seek her approval. He simply wants her to know that the man she raised, no matter how broken, still wants to make the world a better place. Even the heroes who once saw him as a potential threat begin to see glimpses of the Peter Parker they once knew. They are cautious, but they don't shut him out. Slowly, but surely, Peter earns their respect again. He no longer feels the need to prove his worth with grand gestures or victories. The quiet, steady work of rebuilding both within himself and in his relationships speaks for itself. Though it may take time, Peter understands that being accepted back into the fold will never be instantaneous. His actions, his consistency, and his growth will be the only proof he needs to offer. New challenges continue to arise, but Peter faces them with a clarity and purpose he never had before. His powers, while still incredible, are no longer the focal point of his identity. He no longer seeks the validation of being Spider-Man, nor does he look for fame or recognition. His true strength lies in his ability to keep going, even when the road ahead is unclear and his past continues to haunt him. It's about persistence, about understanding that mistakes do not define a person's worth. What matters is how one chooses to move forward. The city, in all its resilience and complexity, reflects Peter's journey. It too has scars from the battles fought, the power struggles endured, and the mistakes made. But just as Peter has begun to rebuild himself, the city begins to heal. It's not a perfect recovery, and it will never be the same as it once was, but there's hope. Hope in the quiet acts of kindness, in the moments of understanding, in the ability to rebuild trust, piece by piece. Peter may never be the same hero he once was. The boy who was filled with idealism and hope may have been replaced by someone more weary, more cautious. But in many ways, this is his true redemption, realizing that the man he is now is the one who can truly make a difference. His journey isn't about erasing his past, it's about accepting it, learning from it, and using it to fuel his future. It is no longer about saving the world or proving himself to anyone. It's about saving himself, finding peace in his own heart, and taking responsibility for the life he leads. In the end, Peter Parker's redemption doesn't lie in the grand, heroic actions he takes. It lies in the quiet moments, in the small choices, in the steady commitment to be better, to do better. It is a lifelong journey, one that he knows will never truly end. But for the first time in a long time, Peter has found peace with who he is and the man he is becoming. Peter's redemption arc continues, but it is now clear that this journey will never be linear. Every day, every choice he makes is a step toward healing, not just for himself, but for the world around him. Though Peter has made strides toward personal growth, he knows that true redemption is not an endpoint, but a constant process. The weight of his past still lingers, and every action he takes requires him to confront that past once more. The city of New York, ever resilient, reflects Peter's own struggles. As the people slowly begin to trust him again, they understand that redemption is a slow, sometimes painful process. They see the small, quiet acts he performs, the ones that are not televised, not publicized, but just part of the fabric of his daily life. But while their trust grows, so does Peter's realization that even small actions can have great meaning. Every child he helps, every moment of support he offers to someone in need, becomes a piece of the puzzle that he has been working on for so long. It's not about grand victories, but about the little moments of selflessness, the quiet demonstrations of strength and courage. Peter's relationship with Mary Jane is perhaps the most challenging. There is no sudden rekindling of romance or fairy tale reunion. Instead, they begin to rebuild their bond, piece by piece, slowly and cautiously. Mary Jane has witnessed firsthand Peter's dark transformation, and her trust is not easily won back. But Peter's persistence, his consistent efforts to be a better man, begin to shift something inside her. Their conversations are long and emotional, filled with a mix of anger, forgiveness, and acceptance. The walls she built around her heart start to crack, but the foundation of their relationship is not something that can be repaired overnight. They have both been through too much, and their healing will take time. Peter's internal struggle continues to challenge him. The remnants of the powers he once wielded, the darkness of Venom, the arrogance of the Green Goblin, the sheer strength of Rhino, still whisper in the back of his mind. They remind him that power is always within reach, and that it's tempting to return to the methods he once used to control his world. But Peter knows now that he cannot allow those urges to control him. They are a part of him, but they do not define him. The biggest battle Peter faces is against himself as he learns to accept his flaws and embrace his imperfect humanity. He will never be the man he was before. He will never be the hero that the world once adored, but that is what makes his redemption so much more meaningful. In a crucial moment, Peter faces a decision that will define the trajectory of his life. A powerful adversary appears, one who threatens the city once again. This time, Peter is confronted with a choice: use the powers he still possesses, the ones that could easily destroy his enemy, or fight with the knowledge that victory doesn't always require force. He chooses the latter. Peter faces his enemy not as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker, the man who has learned to control his impulses, who understands that strength is not in overpowering others, but in restraining oneself when it's most difficult. The battle is hard fought, but Peter's new approach wins the day. It is not his strength that conquers the enemy, it is his wisdom, his self-restraint, and his willingness to protect without controlling. Afterward, Peter feels something he hasn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the kind that comes from victory, but the kind that comes from knowing that he is finally living according to his own values, not the ones he thought he should have. The city is safe again, but more importantly, Peter has made a choice that reaffirms his commitment to his path of redemption. It is a quiet victory, one that no one will ever see, but it means more to him than any public accolade or grand gesture ever could. As time passes, Peter continues to serve the city, not as the Spider-Man who once ruled from the shadows, but as a man who works alongside others. His actions speak louder than any words could. He no longer fights alone, nor does he seek to dominate. The people of New York come to realize that the redemption Peter seeks is not just for them, but for himself. He is no longer defined by the powers he once wielded. He is defined by the choices he makes every day, the choice to protect, to love, to be patient, and to learn from his past. Peter's relationship with Mary Jane grows steadily, though it is always grounded in the reality that their past cannot be erased. There are no promises of perfect happiness or fairy tale endings. But there is understanding. They both know that their love, their bond, will take work. There will be days when they falter, but Peter has learned to be patient, both with himself and with her. In this way, they begin to heal together, slowly, learning that true love is not about perfection, but about being there for one another, despite flaws, mistakes, and scars. Peter's growth is also evident in his interactions with his fellow heroes. While some remain cautious, others begin to see the change in him. Slowly, Peter is accepted back into the fold, not as the hero who once saved the day with a perfect mask, but as the flawed man who has learned the true meaning of heroism. He fights not for recognition, but because he knows it's the right thing to do. And in this quiet personal victory, Peter Parker finds his peace. His redemption will never be complete, for redemption is not a destination, it is a journey. But Peter has learned to embrace the uncertainty of that journey. He knows that each day is a new opportunity to be better, to grow, and to serve. In the end, he finds that the true power doesn't lie in the battles he fights or the victories he wins, but in the ability to face himself every day, to choose to be better than he was yesterday, and to never give up on the road to redemption. Peter Parker's redemption, though deeply personal and transformative, is not something that ends when the final villain falls or when the last piece of the past is put to rest. Even as Peter finds peace with his choices, the city around him continues to evolve, and so does his journey. The lessons he's learned, the mistakes he's made, and the people he's impacted will forever be part of him, but there is a new understanding that colors everything Peter does from here on out. The story of redemption is never truly over, for there will always be new challenges to face, new tests of character, and new opportunities to grow. New York, while no longer under the oppressive rule of a man who once sought to dominate, is still a place in need of heroes. Yet, the kind of hero the city requires has changed. It is no longer about someone with godlike strength or powers beyond the average person's comprehension. The city needs someone who is grounded, someone who understands that being a hero is about more than saving lives. It's about the daily acts of kindness, the quiet strength to protect, and the willingness to make the right choice even when no one is watching. Peter continues to find fulfillment in the small things. His work as Peter Parker takes on a new meaning. He's not chasing headlines or glory, but he's working quietly behind the scenes, helping those who need it most. His involvement with local charities, his willingness to lend a hand without expecting anything in return, and his dedication to improving the community are what define him now. His redemption is not flashy, nor is it something that will ever fully be acknowledged by the public, but Peter no longer seeks validation. He's at peace with his purpose. This shift in his approach to being a hero allows him to rebuild his life, brick by brick, not in the image of the Spider-Man he once was, but in the image of the person he has become. His relationship with Mary Jane, while slow to repair, has begun to show promise. Though she still carries the weight of his past actions, she begins to see the genuine effort Peter has made to change. There are no shortcuts to healing, and they both understand that. They communicate more openly now, building trust slowly, one conversation at a time. Mary Jane has learned to recognize the man before her, not the shadow of the one she once knew. They are both scarred, but they have learned to embrace those scars, to accept that the past cannot be rewritten, only learned from. Peter no longer sees their relationship as a goal to reach or a redemption story to complete. It is an ongoing process of growth, mutual understanding, and respect. The bond with Aunt May also grows, though in a different way than before. They no longer see each other through the lens of the past. Instead, they've come to a place where their relationship is defined not by what Peter has done, but by who he is now. Peter listens more, and Aunt May, though cautious, offers her support in subtle but meaningful ways. The healing between them is quiet but profound, and it is in these smaller, quieter moments that Peter finds true contentment. The world around Peter continues to change as well. While some of his former enemies remain in the shadows, Peter's life is no longer defined by the constant battle for justice. He is no longer obsessed with being the hero New York thinks it needs. He knows that being a hero isn't about the title or the mask. It's about choosing to make the world a better place, one day at a time. The city may have once needed a symbol of power, but now it needs someone who understands that true heroism lies in how we treat others, how we face adversity, and how we choose to love, despite the darkness we carry within us. Peter continues to face challenges, small ones, personal ones, and, at times, larger threats that test his resolve. But with each challenge, he meets it with a wisdom and strength that is born not of his powers, but of his experience. His power, while still formidable, is no longer the crux of his identity. Instead, it is his heart, his ability to empathize, and his relentless pursuit of personal growth that guide him. And so, Peter's journey continues, not as a hero who seeks to be perfect, but as a man who seeks to be better each day. He knows that redemption is not something to be claimed, but something that must be worked for, fought for, and earned. Each day, he chooses to be the man he wants to become, not the man he once was. The scars of his past will never disappear, but they will no longer define him. They will become the foundation upon which he builds his future. The story of Peter Parker is not one of an easily achieved redemption, nor is it one of a flawless hero. It is the story of a man who, through his own mistakes, learned that true strength lies in vulnerability, in acknowledging one's flaws, and in having the courage to move forward despite them. His journey is one of continual growth, of learning, and of striving to be the person he knows he can be, even when the world around him sometimes tells him otherwise. The road ahead will never be without difficulty, but Peter knows now that, with each step, there is a new opportunity to be better, to serve, and to love. The man he was will always be a part of him, but the man he is becoming is the one who will define the future, one built not on power but on the quiet, steady acts of redemption that make a difference, no matter how small they may seem. Peter Parker's life, now marked by steady change, continues to evolve in ways he never could have predicted. With each passing day, he becomes more attuned to the rhythms of his new existence. The hero he once was, the Spider-Man who saved the day, is no longer the focal point of his identity. Instead, Peter now focuses on the quieter, more profound aspects of life, rebuilding his relationships, finding balance in his personal and professional life, and committing himself to being the best version of himself every day. His past, filled with both triumphs and tragedies, is no longer a shadow that haunts him. It has become a map, guiding him as he continues to navigate the difficult journey of redemption. Through his work with local communities and organizations, Peter finds fulfillment in serving others. He works not out of a desire for recognition, but because it aligns with the person he's striving to become. He learns that true power is not measured by the ability to wield strength or control, but by the capacity to make a positive difference in the lives of those around him. Each small interaction, whether it's lending a hand to someone in need or offering guidance to a troubled youth, builds the foundation of his new identity. Though Peter's internal struggle never fully fades, it becomes something he learns to live with. His moments of doubt and fear still arise, but he now faces them with wisdom, knowing that every setback is just another step in his ongoing process of self-improvement. He no longer sees his mistakes as burdens that will never be lifted, but as lessons that guide him toward becoming the man he wants to be. He understands now that redemption is not about erasing the past, but accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to take action that reflects his growth. In his relationship with Mary Jane, Peter faces yet another challenge. Their bond, though healing, is far from perfect. There are moments of tension, moments when Peter's past mistakes threaten to drive a wedge between them. Yet, these moments also offer opportunities for growth and understanding. Peter learns that love is not about perfection, but about mutual respect, communication, and the willingness to face difficult truths together. He no longer expects Mary Jane to forgive him overnight, but he remains steadfast in his commitment to proving that he is worthy of her trust, not through grand gestures, but through the small, everyday actions that show his love and dedication. Aunt May, too, continues to be a crucial part of Peter's life. Their relationship has evolved into something deeper, built on understanding and mutual healing. Aunt May no longer sees Peter as the same person who once made destructive choices. She sees the man he has become, the one who is trying every day to be better. They have both endured their losses, but together they find a new sense of purpose, and Aunt May becomes one of the pillars of support that Peter relies on. Through their relationship, Peter learns that true strength often comes from vulnerability and that healing is a lifelong process. Despite his ongoing work in rebuilding relationships, Peter's role as a protector never fades entirely. He continues to quietly intervene when needed, assisting those in danger, but he does so without fanfare, without seeking recognition. He no longer wears the mask of Spider-Man because it is not the symbol of his redemption. His actions speak for themselves. His commitment to self-improvement, his compassion, and his quiet strength are the new marks of his heroism. As time goes on, the people of New York, though hesitant at first, begin to recognize the change in him. They no longer view him through the lens of fear or distrust, but as someone who has truly grown and learned from his mistakes. In the broader context of the hero community, Peter's status remains in flux. Some of the Avengers continue to approach him with caution, still unsure whether his redemption is permanent or just another phase. But Peter no longer seeks validation from them. His journey is his own, and the only approval he seeks is his own. Over time, however, even the most skeptical begin to see the quiet strength he has developed and the sincerity of his efforts. Peter may never again be the heroic symbol he once was, but he is something far more powerful, a man who has learned to wield his mistakes with humility and integrity. As Peter continues to live out his redemption, he also finds solace in the knowledge that he is not alone. He is part of a larger community of people who, like him, struggle with their own imperfections and fight for the opportunity to be better. He understands now that redemption is not an isolated endeavor. It is a shared journey, one that involves the support and understanding of others. He becomes part of that community, offering his help, his wisdom, and his experiences to those who are still struggling with their own paths. The greatest lesson Peter learns, however, is that true freedom lies not in perfection, but in acceptance. He accepts that he will never be the perfect hero he once envisioned, but he also accepts that the man he is now, imperfect, flawed, but constantly striving for improvement, is enough. Redemption is not about reaching an unattainable ideal. It is about growth, acceptance, and the willingness to keep moving forward despite the obstacles. Peter's story ends not with a final victory or a definitive moment of redemption, but with a quiet understanding that the journey never truly ends. Every day is an opportunity to choose better, to make amends, and to continue growing. Peter no longer defines himself by his mistakes, but by his ability to learn from them and to keep going, no matter how difficult it may be. Peter Parker's story has now entered a new chapter. While his journey toward redemption may never have an official end, it is one that continues to unfold in the most unexpected ways. Though Peter has made significant progress, there are always new challenges that arise, testing him in ways that neither he nor anyone around him can predict. With each challenge, Peter continues to grow, not into a perfect hero, but into a man who understands the complexity of life, the weight of his past, and the ever-present possibility of change. Though the world may not fully recognize the strides Peter has made, there are small moments of acknowledgement that keep him going. His efforts to rebuild New York, to restore some of the trust he once had with its citizens, do not go unnoticed. There are whispers on the streets, conversations in cafes, and occasional smiles from those whose lives he's touched in the quietest of ways. Peter no longer seeks the approval of the masses, but the knowledge that his actions, however small, are making a difference is a silent comfort. His relationship with Mary Jane, though still a work in progress, has reached a point where they both begin to understand the deep, unspoken bond that remains between them. Their love, no longer perfect or idealized, has matured into something grounded in reality. There are no promises of an easy future, but there is mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, the willingness to give each other the space to grow individually while continuing to be there for one another. Peter's bond with Aunt May also continues to evolve. While their past will never be forgotten, it is no longer an anchor that holds them back. They find new ways to connect, to support one another, and to rebuild their shared history. Aunt May has seen Peter grow in ways that she never thought possible, and although the scars of his past actions remain, she has learned to accept that the man before her is different. He is not the Spider-Man who once wore the mask in pursuit of personal redemption or recognition. He is Peter Parker, a man who has learned the value of humility, patience, and love. The broader hero community, which once stood on the sidelines, continues to watch Peter with cautious optimism, though they are unsure of the extent to which he has changed. They see a different man when they look at him now, a man who is no longer consumed by the thirst for power or glory. While he may never return to his role as Spider-Man in the way he once was, he has carved a new path for himself. This path is not about defeating villains with brute strength, but about confronting the personal demons within, accepting his flaws, and constantly working to be a better person for those around him. Peter's role in the world is now defined not by the mask he wears, but by the man he has become. He has learned that being a hero isn't about the grand victories or the applause of the crowd. It is about the quiet moments when you choose to help someone without expecting anything in return. It is about showing up, day after day, even when the weight of your past still feels like a heavy burden. Peter's growth is a reflection of the fact that true heroism lies in the ability to acknowledge one's flaws, learn from mistakes, and keep moving forward, even when the road seems endless. Though Peter's journey is still far from over, he has come to realize that redemption is not a singular destination. It is a lifelong commitment. He has learned to accept that he will never be perfect, that the scars of his past will always remain, and that his journey will always involve making choices that reflect who he is becoming, not who he once was. In these quieter moments, Peter finds peace, not the peace that comes from victory or recognition, but the peace that comes from within. He understands now that he is not defined by the powers he once wielded or the mistakes he made, but by the choices he makes every day. The small, consistent acts of kindness, the willingness to face himself and accept his flaws, and the determination to grow are what define him now. Peter Parker's redemption is ongoing. The road may never be clear, and the challenges may never end, but Peter has found something far more valuable than perfection. He has found a sense of self-worth, a sense of peace, and the quiet understanding that redemption is not about erasing the past, but using it to shape a better future. Peter Parker's journey toward redemption is one that will never truly end, for it is not defined by a single moment of triumph or a grand victory. His story is one of continuous growth, humility, and understanding. Through the years of pain, mistakes, and loss, Peter has learned that true strength is not measured by the powers he once wielded or the battles he fought. It is found in the quiet moments of choosing to be better, to confront the darker parts of himself, and to use his past as a guide for a brighter future. His relationship with Mary Jane, though still healing, grows in depth and understanding. They no longer seek perfection in each other, but the space to grow and heal together. Peter has learned that love is not about flawless moments, but about being there through the hard times, listening and showing up every day. Aunt May, too, has witnessed Peter's growth. Though their past can never be erased, They find a new way to connect, grounded in mutual understanding and respect. She may never forget the pain he caused, but she sees a different man now, a man who takes responsibility, who works to be better, and who continues to honor the values she taught him. The broader world, including his fellow heroes, sees Peter with cautious optimism. While they still question the extent of his redemption, there is no denying that the man he is now is different from the one who once lived in pursuit of control. He has let go of the idea that heroism is about power and glory. Instead, it is about compassion, resilience, and striving for the good every day, even in the smallest ways. Peter's role is no longer defined by the mask of Spider-Man, but by the quiet, steadfast actions of Peter Parker. He finds purpose in helping those around him, in being a mentor, and in contributing to his community. Redemption, as he has learned, is not an end but a continual process of making better choices, learning from mistakes, and being committed to growth. In the end, Peter has learned the most important lesson of all. Redemption is not about erasing the past. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and using it to move forward. It is a lifelong journey, one that requires patience, humility, and perseverance. Peter Parker, once burdened by his past, now walks with peace, knowing that though he may never be perfect, he is always striving to be better. And that is what truly defines him.